not the leaf blower coming out. We have a lot to discuss. I actually filmed this video yesterday and I talked for way too long, so I'm gonna try again. We have a lot of books to go through because this is 2 months worth of reading, so I'm gonna have to go through these a little more quickly than I usually would, but I'm really excited to talk about these books. So I read 19 books in December and then 12 books in January, but because I was on a little bit of a YouTube break in December, I didn't get to talk about the books that I read, and I still really wanted to let you know my thoughts. So I've just compiled all the books that I've read in the last 2 months into this video, so hopefully you don't mind. Let's start off with some YA books, because I've read quite a few. First we have Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. I feel like what I'm going to say about this book is quite similar to what I have to say about a handful of other books that I read in the past couple months, but this is one of those books that a lot of people love and a lot of people have a really close emotional attachment to, but that just wasn't the case for me. I really enjoyed the story. I really enjoyed all of like the themes and like the topics that it kind of discussed. I don't even know how to describe this book. I guess it's like YA coming of age. There's a little bit of mystery involved. It talks about friendships. It talks about the pressure that like society puts on young people in terms of like getting good grades and getting into their dream university or college, things like that. It talks about sexuality, about loneliness, about mental health. There are so many topics discussed in this book, and I would say that I can see how this is a 5-star read for people, and objectively this is a good book. But because I didn't find myself personally connected to the story or the characters, I just couldn't rate it 5 stars. So I think I gave this book like 3 stars. And I also think that if I had read this when I was younger, and so when I was the intended like age bracket of this book, I probably would have loved it a lot more. It kind of gave me John Green vibes. I also read these 2 books in December. These were part of My Husband Chooses My TBR. I'll link that video down below if you didn't see it, but these are 2 of the books that he chose for me to read, and he did such a good job. I quite enjoyed both of these. First of all, we have Today, Tonight, Tomorrow. This is a YA romance, kind of like academic rivals to lovers situation. A lot of people love this and I enjoyed it, but I didn't like love it. I wasn't obsessed with it. I really liked the character development. I feel like I just was never fully convinced of the romance, but I still had a fun time reading it. I think I gave it like 3 stars. The Cousins, on the other hand, I really enjoyed this. I gave this 4 stars. It was just so much fun. This is a YA like mystery thriller situation about 3 cousins who go to spend the summer with their grandmother, but when they get there, their grandmother just basically wants nothing to do with them, and they're so confused because they're kind of like, why did she invite us here if she doesn't even want to spend time with us? So they're kind of like suspicious about the whole situation. They're trying to figure stuff out. I feel like there's a lot of family dynamics. These cousins like don't really know each other very well before they go into it, so we see a lot of friendships being built and also some romantic connections as well. And overall there's just like a lot of family secrets, a lot of just like hidden things come to light, a bit of like an inheritance situation, and I just really liked it. Their grandmother lives on like a small island, so it's like small town vibes as well, and it was just so freaking good. I think if you like Good Girl's Guide to Murder or Truly Devious, you'll probably really enjoy this. Another YA mystery thriller that I have to share is The Girls I've Been, and I think this book deserves so much more hype. Maybe it does have hype and I just haven't seen it, but I picked this book up because I walked into a bookstore and it was one of the like employee recommendations, and I'm so glad I picked it up because this concept was just phenomenal. I know that it is being made into a movie with Millie Bobby Brown, so that's really exciting. I'm really intrigued to see how they recreate this in like a movie format. So this is a story about a daughter of a con artist. Her name is Nora. We're reading the book from the perspective of her being like a teenager. I can't remember exactly how old she is, but at this point in her life, she has grown up basically being like trained by her mother since the day she was born to be a con artist and work alongside her mother to complete these really large con missions, I guess, and she never wanted to be a part of it. So when she got older, she somehow escaped from her mother and kind of escaped that whole life, and now she's kind of living in hiding and trying to just lay low. But of course this book starts off with her getting caught up in a bank robbery, so now she is a hostage in a bank robbery situation, and this whole book is basically her just trying to get out of that situation and using the things that she has learned in her past life, I guess you could say, to help herself and all of the other hostages to get out of this situation. And throughout the book we get flashbacks to when she was younger and working alongside her mother and all the situations and like missions and cons that she was a part of. And I don't know how this book is so short but managed to be so gripping, so heart-wrenching, so much character development. It was just so well done, and I feel like it was just such a unique concept as well. The only reason I don't think I gave it 5 stars is because some bits felt a little bit dragged on and a little bit like, okay, like hurry up, but overall it was just so entertaining. Next we have The Summer of Broken Rules. This was such a highly anticipated read for me, and I liked liked it. Don't get me wrong. I really, really enjoyed this, but it wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. I really went into this being like, this is going to be 5 stars. Like, this is going to be one of my best books of the year. Like, I'm going to absolutely love this. And I liked it. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. But there were just a few things in this book that really irked me, and I just like couldn't see past them. This book is about Meredith, who kind of recently lost her sister. Her sister passed away in an accident, and she is going back to like a family property on Martha's Vineyard to celebrate her cousin's wedding. And that place is just full of a lot of memories, and it's kind of just like a difficult place for her to be, but she also like wants to be able to celebrate her cousin and spend time with her family. And so obviously there's this like story with Meredith where she's just like dealing with a lot. And then we also have the actual like plot of the book, which is this huge family game of assassin. So pretty much the whole family gets involved, all of the aunties, the uncles, the cousins, so many people. And every year they play this huge game of assassin, and it's like a huge deal. It's super fun. And it was really interesting having quite like a sad underlying storyline and like sad undertone, whilst also having this really like fun, upbeat family game and family like celebration going on. It was just like a really interesting mix. My main issue with this book was that our main character was just really selfish. And I do want to say that obviously she is dealing with grief, and everyone deals with grief differently. And Meredith kind of dealt with it by shutting everyone out and isolating herself. And there is no wrong way to deal with grief. I want to make that very clear. However, yes, she was dealing with the loss of her sister, but a lot of the people around her were dealing with the loss of their cousin, the loss of their niece, the loss of their granddaughter. Like, everyone in her family was also dealing with that similar grief. Yes, it's different, and I don't want to discredit her feelings, but she wasn't the only one going through this. And there were so many times where everyone around her like made exceptions for her, and it's like, oh, it's okay that she is shutting us out because she's going through this. It's okay that she's acting this way. And they just like gave her grace, but she just almost didn't give grace to anyone else around her. And that just, it was really hard to read, because I wanted so badly to be able to sympathize with her, but there needed to be some level of compromise for her as well. And we didn't see that until right at the very end, and it made me frustrated. And again, I totally understand that a huge part of that was just her dealing with this really overwhelming grief. So I don't want to say there's anything wrong with how she behaved, but it's just hard to root for someone when they're behaving in that way. I hope that makes sense, because again, I really enjoyed this. I still gave it 4 stars. It was still such a great read to me, but there was just that part of me that couldn't fully invest myself in it or like fully root for the romance, because I was just kind of like, girl, you gotta like compromise a little bit here. I do still definitely recommend it though. Then we have 4 by Veronica Roth. This is kind of like a little novella in the Divergent world. It is a bunch of short stories told from 4's perspective. I feel like it was honestly just really unnecessary. Not gonna lie, the only reason I read this is because when I thrifted my like box set of Divergent books, this was a part of it, and I'm trying to focus on reading all the books on my physical TBR, so I thought this would just be like a fun quick read. It was just so unnecessary. I just like did not care about anything this book had to offer me, so I gave it 2.5 stars. It wasn't like bad, it just felt a little bit like, why does this exist? Moving on, we have pretty much my only non-fiction book of this whole video, and this is Dear Dolly by Dolly Alderton. A lot of you know Dolly Alderton for writing Everything I Know About Love, which was one of my favorite books of 2022. And so when I saw that she brought out another book, of course I had to get my hands on it, and I really enjoyed this. It wasn't quite as good as Everything I Know About Love, but it was still so enjoyable to me. I think that if you loved that book, you'd still really enjoy this one. This is basically a collection of the columns that Dolly has written. I'm assuming some of her favorites. If you didn't know, Dolly Alderton is a columnist. She writes for a newspaper, and basically people go, Dear Dolly, here's my issue, here's my problem, what's your advice? And she obviously gives them her advice. And I just think she gives such wise and well thought out answers and solutions to these problems. I just personally love Dolly Alderton's writing. Next, we have a book that, again, I feel like I don't even need to talk about because you guys already know how I feel about this book. I don't annotate books, but this book has annotations on almost every single page. So if you don't know, this is Magnolia Parks: The Long Way Home, the 3rd book in the Magnolia Parks universe. I'm literally so obsessed with this universe. It's like Gossip Girl set in high society London. Everyone says that, but that is just like the best description. And this whole series is full of just like really toxic relationships, a lot of miscommunication, but also like a soulmate kind of love, and just like nothing can keep us apart kind of love. The writing is like none other, and I am just simply obsessed, but I'm not going to talk about it for too much longer because otherwise this video will be an hour long, because I cannot stop talking about Magnolia Parks. I also read the fine print and terms and conditions. I don't have the fine print right now because I've lent it out to a friend, but I really went into the fine print thinking that I wasn't going to enjoy it, and I was so pleasantly surprised. I ended up enjoying it a lot more than I thought. I gave it 3.75, so like not an absolute favorite, but better than I thought it was going to be, if I'm being honest. And then when I moved on to Terms and Conditions, I was even more pleasantly surprised because this one ended up being like a 4 or a 4.25 star read for me. I loved Declan and Iris. If you haven't heard about this series, it's like a contemporary romance trilogy about 3 brothers. They each get their own book, and these 3 brothers are the grandson of a guy who owns basically like the equivalent of Disney, but in this like fake world. And the grandfather has recently passed away, and in order for all of the sons to receive their share of the inheritance, they each need to complete a specific task their grandfather has left them. So each one of the books is centered around one brother who's trying to complete his task. And of course there's romance involved. The 3rd book was actually just released, so I need to get my hands on that very soon. But the first 2 books are very much Grumpy Sunshine. A lot of people say they're too similar. I personally didn't find them too similar, but of course they definitely had similar aspects. They're both Grumpy Sunshine. They're both billionaire romances. I think the 2nd book was just so much better than the 1st, and I honestly think I might even enjoy the 3rd book more than I've enjoyed the first 2, because I'm pretty sure it's second chance romance, which is one of my favorite tropes, and I'm really excited. A romance that I don't have the physical copy of because I borrowed it from the library is The No-Show by Beth O'Leary. I really enjoyed this. I gave it 3.75. Again, not like an absolute favorite, but still so enjoyable. This book is about 3 girls. We get to read from each of their POVs, and they all get stood up on Valentine's Day. And I feel like the story itself is so much more like complicated and has so much more depth to it than that, but I can't really tell you what it's about without ruining anything. The ending of this book was so well done. I was shocked at how well all the 3 POVs came together and how they were interconnected, but despite the end being so well done, I feel like it just took a long time to get there, and the getting there was just not that great. Like, it was a bit slow, but yeah, the ending was really, really good. So I do think it's worth the read. I do still recommend it, but you almost have to go into it knowing it's going to be a little bit slower. Next we have From Lucov with Love by Mariana Zapata. I really enjoyed this. This is a figure skating romance, enemies to lovers. I guess it's like grumpy rather than like Grumpy Sunshine, and I actually really liked having a grumpy female lead because she was just such a strong, like, boss girl kind of personality, and that was just really, really fun to read about. I really imagine Jasmine in this book as this girl from this movie. I feel like they exude the same energy. But this was definitely very slow burn. Like, the romance is like literally like this. Like, them actually like being happy and in love is like the tiniest portion of the book. Most of the book is Jasmine like thinking they're enemies, and like Ivan being so clearly in love with her the whole time, but her just being like, yeah, we're enemies, like he hates me, we hate each other. And it's like, no, he's so obsessed with you. Like, how do you not see it? It is a chunky book, but it did not feel chunky when I was reading it. Like, it just felt so fast. And I also just love how the more you get to know the love interest, the more like lovely he becomes, and like the more like soft, I guess, he becomes. I think I gave this like 4 stars. Moving on to fantasy. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll already know this, but I picked up my first Cassandra Clare book, and I am so happy that I did because I just had such a good time. So the first book I picked up was City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. This is the first book in the Mortal Instruments series, which is in the Shadowhunters universe. I will say there are many ways that you can go about reading her books, and I would say just do your own research. I literally just Googled it to figure out which reading order I wanted to follow. There's also a lot of YouTubers who talk about what they recommend, but there's just many ways you can do it, so you just kind of have to pick for yourself which one you want to go with. So I decided to start with the Mortal Instruments, City of Bones, which this book is very interesting. It is very interesting. So the Shadowhunters universe is YA urban fantasy, which basically just means that it's like fantasy but still like also in the real world. So in this story, we have the real world, we have humans, and there's magical creatures living amongst them, but they just can't see it. And if you can see it, it means that you're somewhat magical in one way or another. And our main character, Clary, is a teenager who one day just starts seeing things. She starts seeing the magical creatures and she's like, what the frick is going on? I am going crazy. But she ends up finding out that she is kind of magical within this realm. She belongs with these magical creatures, and her ability to see these things has just been like taken away from her up until this point in her life. So now that she's a part of this world, she kind of gets integrated more into it, and also her mother has gone missing, and that's kind of like what the main plot is centered around. It's like her finding her mum. A lot of people don't like this series, and you know what, it's quite questionable. I understand why people don't love it and why people have issues with it, because there are some major issues with these books. But I will say the first 3 books I gave 3 stars. They were fine. It was okay. It was interesting enough for me to continue reading. And then I would say when you move to the final 3 books in the series, it gets a lot better. So I gave the 4th book 3.5 stars, the 5th book 4 stars, and the 6th book I gave 5 stars. Did the writing and plot deserve 5 stars? Maybe not. It was definitely the best book out of the Mortal Instruments. However, by the end of this series, I was just so obsessed with our cast of characters and the found family and the friendships and the romance and all of it, that I just had to give it 5 stars because I was so sad to leave this world. I can't believe that I'm saying that because after reading the first book, I was like, I don't know if this is gonna be for me. I don't know if I'm gonna like this. But like I said, the series just gets better and better the further you read. And the last book was just so good. And then after finishing the Mortal Instruments, of course, I wanted to continue with more Cassandra Clare. And so I picked up the Infernal Devices, and this is the crowd favorite. Everyone is obsessed with this trilogy. I feel like everyone that I talk to is like, yeah, the Mortal Instruments is okay, but the Infernal Devices, that's where it's at. And they were so right. They were so right. So these are actually prequels to the Mortal Instruments. Timeline wise, these happen first, but you can read either these first or you can read these first. Like I said, do your research because it's just too complicated for me to explain right now. I gave the first book 4.5 stars, the second book 5 stars, the third book 5 stars. This was just so freaking good. The romance was amazing. The plot was fine, but the romance was so good. There is a love triangle in this series that is just so well done. I do think I knew the whole way through who was going to end up together in the end, but I can understand why so many people would have been obsessed, truly obsessed with this series, especially when they were a lot younger. Because I think if I had read this when I was in high school, I would have been so annoying. I would have not have shut up about this. And even as a 24-year-old reading the series a decade after it was popular, I still think this is so worth the read, and this whole Shadowhunters universe is so worth the read. And I will definitely be continuing to read the rest of the Shadowhunters universe because it's so fun. And Cassandra Clare just makes you fall in love with characters, and I love that. So if you feel like you're too old or you just missed the hype or missed the bandwagon with these books, this is your sign to read them now because it is never too late to pick up a book. I also read The Starless Sea, and I really, 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 really wanted to love this, but I just simply did not. And this is another situation where I know objectively this could be a 5-star read, and this is a 5-star read for so many other people, but because I just didn't ever feel connected to the story or the characters in this book, it was a flop for me, and I'm really sad about that because I honestly thought this was a 5-star prediction and the concept just sounded so interesting to me. But this book is not character driven, and it's also not plot heavy, and so it's kind of just concept and symbolism heavy, and I just don't know if that's the type of book for me. I wish I loved it. I truly do, and I'm sorry that I didn't, but those are just my honest thoughts. I also read Kingdom of the Wicked. This is a book about Amelia, and she is a witch living in a world where witches aren't really well liked, and it's kind of dangerous for her to be there, so she's kind of like a secret witch, I guess. But right at the beginning of this novel, she finds her twin sister dead, and obviously that is so traumatizing for her, but she wants to figure out how it happened and why it happened. And so this whole book is just centered around her trying to figure that out, and she kind of accidentally summons the help from a very dangerous man, shall we say, and there's also some romance going on, if you know what I mean. I will say, I listened to this on audiobook, and the audiobook is phenomenal. The narrator does such an incredible job. The way that she voiced these characters was just so well done. There was also background, suspense music going on at some parts of the book. It was just an experience, and I really, really enjoyed the audiobook. But as a whole, I felt very meh about this book. There was nothing that really gripped me at any point of it. I enjoyed it the whole way through. The whole way through, I was just entertained and enjoying it, but at no point was I just obsessed with it. And since finishing it, I've not really thought about it once, and so I don't think I'm going to continue the trilogy, which is very odd for me because usually I'm someone who, if I start a series, I will finish it, but there's just nothing about this that really made me want to continue. I do think it's worth the read, and I think that some people will absolutely adore it, but I just I don't know, it's just not the fantasy series for me, I think. Another fantasy series that I decided to start was Guild, which is the first book in the Plated Prisoner series by Raven Kennedy, and I feel really conflicted talking about this series because I honestly don't know what to say. I think I gave this book 3 stars. At the end of this book, I kind of felt very similarly with Kingdom of Wicked, where it was enjoyable to read. It was definitely hard to read at some points, but I kind of enjoyed them the same amount. However, at the end of this book, for some reason, there was just something something that made me want to continue the series, and something where I just like couldn't stop thinking about the characters and I just like needed to know what was going to happen, whereas I didn't feel like that with this one. So I did continue the series. I read Glint and Gleam, and I also ended up getting Glow from my library. And like I said, I just feel really conflicted because whilst I know that this is a favorite series for so many people, it definitely wasn't like a favorite of mine, but I also did enjoy it, but it also has so many trigger warnings that I don't know if I want to like recommend it. It actually has a little like trigger warning as soon as you open the book. It says this series will contain explicit content and dark elements that may be triggering to some. It will include explicit romance, mature language, violence, non-consensual sex, and emotional manipulation. It is not intended for anyone under 18 years of age. So please keep that in mind if you're going to pick up this book. It is an adult dark fantasy. It's technically a like fantasy romance series, but I would say the romance doesn't even really come into it until maybe like the third book. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, I read them all very close together, so it's kind of hard because they've merged into one in my brain. But this is a King Midas retelling or reimagining, and our main character Erin is basically a prisoner of the king, but she has been emotionally manipulated into believing that he loves her and that he cares for her, and she's not a prisoner, she's just like being protected, and she's in love with this man who treats her so awfully and abuses her in pretty much every single way. And so as a reader, you can recognize this, but our main character doesn't. And so it's really, really hard to read. I would say like the first book as a whole is just quite difficult because the whole way through, our main character is just like, oh, but he loves me. And it's like, no, he does not. But one thing I do love about this series is that as it continues, our main character does realize what is happening and what has happened to her. And we see so much character development from her and so much growth, and really just like works through the trauma that she has dealt with and didn't even like realize she was dealing with at the time. So it is a really powerful read in some aspects. I'll also say the first book, like I said, very difficult. I wasn't like obsessed with it. I rated it 3 stars. The second book, I think I rate like 3.5 or 3.75 stars. Third book, I think was like 4 or 4.25. I would say the end of this book was really, really good. But then the fourth book, I felt like kind of fell off a bit, and it just like not much happened. There was a lot of character development, but it was kind of just a lot of like training montages and like backstories of other characters, which obviously are important, but plot-wise, there was just like not really a lot going on. And I do feel like that was necessary because I know that in the final book that's going to come out later this year, we will probably have those like big action scenes where everything kind of comes together and we see like the results of all of the things that were set up during this book. So all that being said, would I recommend this series? I don't know. I think you just kind of need to decide for yourself if it's something that sounds interesting to you and if it's something that you think you can like handle, I guess. So I'll leave it up to you. I know a lot of you are going to be very excited about this, but I did in fact pick up these 2 books in January. Crescent City 1 and 2, House of Earth and Blood, and House of Sky and Breath. These are the last 2 Sarah J Maas books that I had to read. I've read the ACOTAR series, I've read Throne of Glass, and so of course I wanted to pick up Crescent City, and I did in January. And I'm going to be so annoying and not tell you my thoughts on these because I do have a reading vlog coming hopefully next week, I think. You can wait to see what I think there. I filmed my whole like reading experience, my predictions, my thoughts, my reaction to the end of the second book, if you know, you know. And I'm excited to share that with you guys, but I did read them and my thoughts are coming soon. I also read Daughter of No Worlds by Carissa Broadbent, I think it is. This is a start of a trilogy. It's on Kindle Unlimited and I really, really enjoyed this. I obviously haven't read the other books in the series, so I can't talk about those, but it was a really great start to a fantasy series in my opinion. I don't know if it's marketed as fantasy romance. In my opinion, it was like mostly fantasy and then like a tiny little bit of romance, but obviously I'm assuming that romance will build in the other books. I'm not gonna lie, it is very like stereotypical fantasy in the sense of girl is in bad situation, girl gets out of bad situation, gets trained by someone / like learns how to use her magic, works out she's very powerful, crazy, never seen before, then uses power to be the best, save the world, that kind of thing. Like, we've seen it before and we're probably gonna see it again, but I eat it up every time. I love it. So if you enjoy that sort of stuff, I definitely recommend it, and hopefully I'll read the rest of the books in the next few months. I think this is my last book to talk about, but we have The Stolen Heir by Holly Black. This was one of my most anticipated reads for 2023. It was released early January, and this feels so sentimental to me because this is a spin-off series from The Cruel Prince, or like the Folk of the Air trilogy. And The Cruel Prince was the first fantasy book that I read that really made me fall in love with fantasy. So to read its spin-off series a year later from when I personally read The Cruel Prince is just like such a sentimental feeling and such like a special like full circle moment, I guess you could say. But this book follows Oak and Ren. Oak is a side character in The Cruel Prince. I definitely recommend reading the Folk of the Air trilogy before reading this. There's a lot of just like characters and events that are mentioned in this, and it's kind of like expected that you already know what they are and what happened. So although you like can go into this without reading that, I don't recommend doing it that way personally. But in this story, Oak kind of teams up with Ren, who is one of his like childhood friends, and then they like haven't seen each other in a long time, and now they're like teenagers, and they've teamed up to kind of complete a mission, I guess you could say. And Ren has just had a really tough life, so she's very like untrusting of the people around her. And so I don't know if I'd call this like an enemies to lovers story, but it does have those kind of vibes to it, I guess. I literally only just finished this, and I think I'm gonna give it probably like 4 or 4.25 stars. I wasn't as obsessed with this as I was when I was reading the Cruel Prince trilogy, but in saying that, I think this book did a really good job at setting up the second book, because this is going to be a duology, and I feel like the way this ended and even the way that the characters were set up and how they behaved in this first book, I can just see so much potential for the second book. And I think the second book could honestly be a 5-star read for me. It doesn't come out till I think next February, so we still have to wait a whole year. I did really enjoy this. I think Holly Black's writing, especially when she's writing about Elfhame and like in this world, is just so beautiful, and it just feels so magical. And that is exactly what I want when I read a fantasy. Like, I want it to feel magical and just feel otherworldly, and that's exactly what I got in this. It just didn't have enough like going on for me to really connect to the characters, connect to the plot line, give it 5 stars. But again, like I said, I can really see the next book being a 5-star read for me, and I still really enjoyed this. But those are all of the books that I read in December and January. I hope you enjoyed hearing my thoughts on all of these. I would love to know what your favorite book that you've read recently is. I'm always looking for new books to add to my TBR, but I love you guys so much, and I will see you in a few days with my February TBR. Goodbye.